Good afternoon, students. It's Mr. V. Today what I'm going to do is teach you how to use colored pencils using the techniques that we'll study in this class. Now, you're probably thinking, colored pencils, isn't that like, junior high baby stuff? Well, not necessarily. Check this out. All of that, colored pencil. Colored pencil is a fine art medium that can be used just like paint. And as a matter of fact, the techniques I'll teach you is almost as if you're painting in colored pencil. A strong drawing background translates into a very strong painting background, and colored pencil is the happy medium between drawing and painting. You can get some awesome effects using colored pencil. What I'm going to do in the screencast is I'm going to teach you how to use your colored pencils in a very specific way to achieve a very specific effect. I'm going to show you guys also a little bit of color theory, how that applies, and then finally we're going to look at some examples on how those techniques apply in a work. This is a colored pencil drawing of several tomatoes. Notice how smooth and glossy and almost waxy the surface is. Can you see any strokes? Can you see any gaps in between the colors? Can you even see the tooth of the paper? No. That's because a very specific technique was used in this. This technique is called semicircular scumbling. Now you remember scumbling from our landscape lesson when I taught you how to do tree bark. Scumbling is controlled scribbling. It's basically layering value in without using repetitive strokes of the same type. It's a little bit different though in the way you use colored pencil. This is an example of the technique. Semicircular scumbling is by making several teeny tiny little circles and overlapping them, almost like you're going to be drawing a tornado, like you're doodling in a notebook. It's very light, it takes a sharp pencil. You are very mindful of the pressure scale as you do this. As a matter of fact, mastery of layering and pressure is essential for this to work, or else it simply won't happen on the paper. You paint out the white of the paper. You want it to go away completely. Now you can still see gaps between the colors here. That creates a nice sandy, even tone, but you layer over the top of it. And as you can see, if you've mowed a lawn before, work in strips. If your pressure is consistent, then you will have consistent tone. If your pressure varies at all, or if your strokes are too big, then you will have swirlies and blotches all over the place. And you simply layer over the top of what you do, just like you do in a normal value drawing as you were shown. And by increasing the pressure, you get darker areas, bolder areas with more color, and you get to have a nice saturated, sandy texture on there. Saturation. What is saturation? Think back to when we first learned how to do value drawings. Paper has what's called a tooth. A tooth happens to be the peaks and the valleys in the texture of the paper. Sandpaper has a very strong tooth. It's designed to rip things apart. Printer paper has almost no tooth. It's very smooth and it doesn't grab color at all very well. Drawing paper that we use has a very good tooth to it. It's what we'll be using for these colored pencil pieces. You need to understand how a tooth works. It's like mountains and valleys. The mountains, the parts of the tooth, rip the color off of the medium that you're using. And then the color trickles down and fills in those little valleys down there. When those valleys become full, that is 100% saturation. You can tell that a piece is fully saturated by one step, by it not taking any more color at all, like you might draw over the top of it and it won't take anything. Or two, where you can't really see that sandiness anymore, where there aren't any little teeny tiny microscopic white gaps in between the tone. Going back to our tomato, this piece is 100% saturated. Even though there's white on there, all the tone everywhere has been totally filled up. So as you work, be mindful of your saturation level. If it doesn't take anything else, and if it's completely full, you've hit 100% saturation. You need to know that for one of the final steps of your piece. This is a non-example of colored pencil use. This piece did not use any semicircular scumbling. It was just a thumbnail of a painting that I was going to do eventually. And I just kind of did zigzags, just like you would think to fill in with a crayon and such. But let's take a look over here at this orange-yellow. Notice the colors do not mix together. There are some areas of yellow, some areas of red, and it's very streaky. There's several strokes. You can actually see long strokes in there. Very sloppy. That did not use the technique. Two reasons why it didn't use the technique, and also there's no tooth on this printer paper. I drew it on printer paper. All right, let's look over here at yellow-green. Yellow-green is like at 100% saturation. It didn't allow the colors to mix. It's the result of the use of the medium. That's printer paper. If we look over here at green, right here at the bottom, that has areas that are fully saturated right about here, and these areas which still have some room to go. It's probably about 50% in this area. Right here in these areas of like this reddish that is, probably about half saturation. Practice is how you get used to this, and that's what the use of a sketchbook is for. You'll need to practice different saturation levels in your sketchbook in order to get it down and master it. It's not something that can be accomplished just by doing the labs in class. Now, why do you pay attention to saturation? Well, it helps you take color, but once your piece is fully saturated, the final step that you use in a colored pencil drawing is what we call compression. Compression is where you forcibly flatten everything that's on your paper. You take those mountains and you squash them down. And that's accomplished in a couple of ways. One is through the use of a pressure 3 with your colored pencils. Once you go to a pressure 3, it flattens out those valleys and it won't take any more pigment. The other way is when you hit it at the very end with what's called a colorless blender. A colorless blender is simply a colored pencil that does not have any pigment in it whatsoever. All it is wax. And it has two functions. One, to blend an area of heavy saturation into an area of light saturation. It's a way of physically blending for nice, cool, soft edges. Refer to the screencast on blending with only a pencil to know what a hard edge and a soft edge is. And also, it's used to seal the image when you're finished. If you hit your entire piece with a colorless blender at the end, it will coat it in a nice sheet of wax. It gives it that glossy appearance, just like this image of the peppers. You don't see any gaps in between the tooth of the paper. It adds a finishing element to it. That's this artist's secret to making their work so vibrant and so bold and intense. So let's quickly review. Semicircular scumbling, very tiny. You use very small tornado-like strokes to paint an entire block of tone. You use a paper that has a good tooth to it, and that creates what's called saturation. Pressure 1 through pressure 2 generally creates a very low to medium saturation. Once things get up to a full saturation, meaning you can get there by simply doing a pressure 1 forever until it fills up, that's when you're ready to compress. Once your paper is fully saturated, hit it with the colorless blender to seal it up. Now in this piece, there is no paper visible, not even on the white areas. This artist here used white colored pencil to fill in the tooth. And also you can see the white does not have a hard edge. It blends into the surrounding areas. You use that just like paint. You would paint white into the surrounding colors and use a colorless blender to smear it all together at the very end. So always shoot for having all of your paper covered. That translates to painting when you want to have all of your canvas covered. If you have visible canvas, your piece looks unfinished and unprofessional. Now let's tie in what we learned about complementary colors. The technique known as complementary shading is something that you're going to hear a lot, especially when we're working with colored pencil. Complementary shading is when you go in and you add shadows to your piece. Here's an example of some pears. What color would be used to create the shadows based on what you've learned in the last screencast? If you guessed violet, you're correct. These pears are yellow and some parts green. So in the areas where a shadow falls on yellow, in order to achieve that shadow, you would shade it by using a little bit of violet. My rule of thumb for beginners is don't hit it with complementary shading until you've gotten the base color of your form all laid in. You go in and you paint the complementary shadows in last. Now where do you put those shadows? Well, you put those shadows in the darkest parts, where there's the boldest and most saturated red. There are also other times, though, when you would use your normal hatching techniques with colored pencil, like this one right here. This is a ink blot converted into kind of a mouse head. And in order to get that furry texture, we had to use the techniques we've already learned, hatching, directional hatching to draw hair. The same applies. The challenge lies in getting that saturation. Let's look at this guy's cheeks. When you go to add complementary shadows in here, you can see like the color orange popping out of the blue still. You got to be mindful of your saturation levels there. And since it's uneven through the use of hatching, it's more of a challenge. So just something to be mindful of. And then finally, the colorless blender. That seals the piece. Use semicircular scumble over the entire piece at pressure 3. The whole piece, everything. Start from the black and work your way out. At high speed, it seals it all together. It actually makes the piece look a lot more vibrant as well. Now it does take time. This piece took 1 hour and 5 minutes. That translates again about 1 1/4 class periods for you. And one final question: why don't you just hit it with dark high pressure in order to get that saturation? Well, it leaves you with fewer options. It's a lot easier to add dark than to take it away. And the other reason is to mix color. You can't mix colors together with high saturation, or else there's no tooth to grab the pigment. Paper's all full. So there was a lot of information in there. I hope you found it helpful. Please review this. This is probably going to be the most important make it or break it screencast for future assignments. Master this technique. Use it in your sketchbooks. And I look forward to seeing you in class. Take care.